The fluorescent lights of the paddock usually signify prestige, but in the back of the Pramac Yamaha garage in Brazil, they felt like an interrogation. For Toprak Razgatlıoğlu, the reigning king of superbikes and the great Turkish hope of MotoGP, the 2026 season was supposed to be a coronation. Instead, it had become a mechanical nightmare. As the dust settled on a disastrous weekend in South America, the data directive was issued from Yamaha's headquarters in Iwata. The failed experiment narrative was starting to leak into the European press, and the pressure on the Pramac technical team had reached a breaking point. Rumors began to circulate among the mechanics that if a solution wasn't found before the lights went out at the Circuit of the Americas, the internal political fallout would be catastrophic. The stakes were no longer just about points. They were about the survival of a project that had cost tens of millions of dollars. The transition from Yamaha's legendary inline-4 engine to the aggressive V4 power unit was the most significant technical pivot in the company's racing history. It was a move made specifically to satisfy Toprak's hunger for power, yet in the early rounds of 2026, it felt like a poisoned chalice. The V4 delivered the top speed, but it destroyed the flow that had made Toprak a god on a superbike. In the days leading up to the Grand Prix of the Americas, the Pramac garage became a laboratory of desperation. Yamaha engineers, flown in directly from Japan, joined forces with the Pramac crew to strip the bike to its bare bones. The primary culprit was the electronics. In Brazil, the traction control was intervening so violently that Toprak described the bike as hiccuping out of corners. This wasn't just a technical glitch, it was a fundamental disagreement between the bike's brain and the rider's right wrist. Reports from paddock insiders suggested that the team was split down the middle. One side believed Toprak needed to change his riding style to suit the MotoGP prototype. The other, led by Toprak's longtime confidants, argued that the bike must be bent to his will. The tension was palpable. As the team worked 18-hour shifts in the Austin heat, the question remained, could they find a middle ground before the most physical track on the calendar broke their rider's spirit? To understand the mountain Toprak had to climb, you have to understand the Circuit of the Americas. With 20 corners and a brutal uphill climb into a blind turn 1, COTA is a rider killer. But more than the geography, it is the house that Marc Marquez built. For a decade, the Spaniard has treated this asphalt as his personal playground. For a rookie like Toprak, entering Marquez territory while struggling with a temperamental bike was like walking into a lion's den with a broken spear. The paddock whispers were getting louder. Social media was rife with comparisons, with many claiming that Toprak's stunted style, his signature of lifting the rear wheel 3 feet off the ground under braking, would never work on a MotoGP bike at COTA. The critics argued that the aerodynamics of the 2026 Yamaha were too sensitive for such violence. According to some technical analysts, every time Toprak tried his trademark move, the aero downforce would reset, causing the bike to become dangerously unstable at 200 miles per hour. He was being told to stop being Toprak Razgatlioglu and start being a simulator rider. But as the first practice session approached, the Turkish rider remained uncharacteristically silent, his eyes fixed on the telemetry screens. 48 hours before the first engines roared in Austin, a radical decision was made behind closed doors. The team would abandon the safe setup that the Yamaha factory had recommended. Instead, they moved toward a geometry that was almost unheard of in the modern era, an extreme weight bias toward the front, designed to let Toprak overload the tire. It was a gamble of the highest order. If it worked, he would have the front-end feel he desperately craved. If it failed, the bike would likely tuck the front and send him into the Texas dirt at terrifying speeds. The work didn't stop until 4:00 a.m. Mechanics, fueled by espresso and the fear of another failure, rebuilt the suspension links and remapped the entire power delivery for the V4. The Austin update, as it was being called, wasn't just a tweak. It was a total reimagining of the motorcycle. Yet even as the bike was wheeled into the pit lane for Friday morning, a new shadow emerged. During the mandatory medical check, Toprak had been seen favoring his right wrist. While the team officially denied any issues, rumors suggested a training incident during the week had left him with a severe setback. He was heading into the most demanding race of his life with a secret injury and a bike that had never been tested in this configuration. When Toprak finally hit the track for free practice, the paddock held its breath. The first few laps were tentative, the V4 sounding angry and unrefined against the Texas hills. But then it happened. Heading into the heavy braking zone of turn 12, Toprak didn't just slow down, he attacked. The rear of the Yamaha rose, the carbon brakes glowing a hellish orange, and for the first time in 2026, the bike didn't fight him. It followed his command. The simulation data was being rewritten in real time. By the end of the first session, Toprak's sector times in the technical sections were matching the factory Ducatis. The radical setup change was working, but the cost was becoming visible. Every time he pulled into the garage, Toprak's face was grimmer, the physical toll of wrestling the V4 with a compromised wrist clearly visible. Some insiders claimed that the pain was so intense he could barely grip the bars during the final sector. Yet he refused to pull over. He was no longer just fighting for points. He was fighting to prove that the Superbike King belonged in the elite tier of world racing. As the sun set over the Austin skyline on Saturday, the drama shifted from the track to the medical center. The secret was out. Toprak's wrist was heavily inflamed. The aggressive braking that had brought him back into the top 10 was also his greatest enemy. Every time he squeezed the lever, it felt like a knife was being driven into his forearm. The team was faced with a heartbreaking dilemma. Do they tell him to back off and secure a safe finish, or do they let him hunt for the podium and risk a career-altering incident? Inside the Pramac garage, the atmosphere was a mix of awe and anxiety. They had finally given their rider a weapon, but the weapon was breaking the rider. The technical director was seen in a heated confrontation with Yamaha's medical staff. The debate wasn't just about the race, it was about the long-term future of the 2026 campaign. If Toprak pushed too hard at COTA and caused permanent damage, the season was over. But if he backed down now, the momentum they had fought so hard to regain would vanish. The decision was ultimately left to Toprak. His response was short, sharp, and delivered with the intensity of a man who had seen the bottom and refused to go back. "Give me the bike, I will handle the rest." As the riders lined up on the grid for the Grand Prix of the Americas, the narrative seemed set. It would be a battle of attrition, Toprak's will versus the V4's violence. But as the mechanics cleared the grid and the tension reached its peak, a final, unexpected factor entered the equation. A sudden drop in track temperature had sent the tire technicians into a frenzy. The hard front tire that Toprak had relied on all weekend was suddenly outside its operating window. The gamble had just become a double down. To use the softer tire meant Toprak would lose the stability that his braking style required. To stay with the hard tire meant he would have no grip for the first 3 laps, the most dangerous laps of the race. The lights began to flicker, the roar of 24 V4 and inline-4 engines drowning out the cheers of the crowd. This wasn't just a race anymore. It was a test of how much a human being could endure in the pursuit of greatness. The Texas gamble was about to pay off, or it was about to destroy everything the Turkish Sultan had built. The 2026 Grand Prix of the Americas will be remembered as the moment the MotoGP hierarchy was shaken to its core. When the checkered flag finally waved, the result wasn't just a number on a scoreboard, it was a statement of intent. Toprak Razgatlioglu had walked into the most difficult circuit in the world, with a bike that didn't want to turn and a body that wanted to quit, and he had forced the world to watch. The Pramac project was no longer a failed experiment. The technical bridge between the Superbike world and the MotoGP elite had finally been crossed. As Toprak sat in the garage after the race, his wrist iced and his eyes exhausted, the paddock whispers had changed. They were no longer asking if he could ride a MotoGP bike. They were asking how long it would take before he started winning on one. The season was far from over, and the Ducatis were still the masters of the standings, but the aura of invincibility had been cracked. The Sultan had arrived in Texas, and the 2026 season would never be the same again.